BPSC 131 course from now onwards. So, this BPSC 131 is about Introduction to Political Theory. So, in this entire course, we will be learning about what is politics and how political theories are important to run the government, and how it is very very important to run the state. And this will give us an insight that how many theories are there, how they are different from each other, and what are the theories that we should know to make a state very peaceful. So, in today's class, we will be talking about three units. We'll be discussing for about unit one, that is what is politics. We will be learning about politics in this, that what is politics, how it evolved. In unit two, we will be learning about political theory. What are the different types of political theory? Liberty. So, in this part, we will be learning about what is liberty, what is freedom, and for today's class we will be covering these contents. That is, in what is politics part, we will be defining politics. We will be knowing about the study of politics. In this part also, we will be learning about what is the state. So here we will be talking about Ralph Miliband's views on state, various forms of states, the legitimate use of power. So in this part, we will be learning about all these three units and these three topics, and these are very very important. Next comes the what is political theory. So in this part, we will be understanding political theory and how political theory and other interrelated terms are often, they are considered to be same, but they are different. They have different meanings. So in this part, we will be knowing about them. We will be learning about them, that how it is different. The words, the terms are different from political theory. For example, political ideology. So how political ideology is different from political theory. Many times we intermix all these terms. So here we will be knowing about these terms separately. So it will make us understand how it is different from each other. Next comes the approaches in political theory. What are the approaches? So here we will be talking about historical and normative approach, and empirical and contemporary approach. So this will also enhance our knowledge about political theory, how there are different types of theory that exist in politics. Next comes the liberty. So here we will be learning about the meaning of liberty. What does it mean? Next comes the distinction between the positive and negative liberty. And then in last, we will be learning about Isaiah Berlin's two concepts of liberty. So this entire session will be very, very important, because all these three units are very important to understand, and it requires to be understood because it is the base. It will give you a proper base, basic understanding about what is politics. That is our main subject. So let's start. We will be starting with what is politics, and here we will be defining the politics and the study of politics. So, the term politics is derived from the Greek word polis, meaning both city and state. So we are often, say this word politics, politics. We should know from where this word originated. So this term politics is originated from Greece. It is a Greek word, polis, and from this word polis, it evolved into politics. So what does this polis mean? This polis mean both city and state. So this polis is the origination of the term politics. So what is the narrow view of politics? The narrow view of politics is that politics is rivalries of politicians in their struggle for power. So whenever we have heard news and read newspapers, we often see that it is a power, competition between the politicians. They want more power. Each and every politicians want more power, and for that they have rivalries between each other. So this is the narrow view, where politics is a rivalry of politicians in their struggle for power. But politics is a collective activity. What is the aim of politics, and what is politics in real? It is a collective activity where all people come together and take decisions. So politics is about power and how it is distributed. So politics talks about power. and who should get how much power is all about politics. So it is about power and how the power is distributed among various people. So, politics involves reconciling differences through discussions and persuasions. As in the second point, we have read that politics is a collective activity, collective in the sense where all people come together and they take decisions. So, this politics involves reconciling differences. There are so many people, and there bound to happen differences of opinion. And politics is, through discussions and persuasion, come to a particular point and reconcile the differences between all through discussions and persuasion. So suppose there is a group of people, they have different kind of ideas in them, they have different ideologies also. So what is politics? It is coming up of all those people into one particular decision regarding the welfare of the people. That is the aim. And how they come to that position, they discuss and persuade between each other, they talk, they debate, and then they come to a particular point. So according to Shiveli, politics is working out rationally the best common solution to a common problem. So this is a very helpful, definition of politics that is given by Shivli. And here it is said that politics is working out rationally the best common solution to a common problem. So what is there? There is a common problem that is there in a particular society or an area. And what is politics? People come together, they think rationally, and they try to find out the best common solution after discussion and persuasion. So, this is what politics is all about. Now, let's talk about politics as a practical activity. So, politics difficult to define precisely. It is very difficult to define precisely what is politics. So, a crisp definition of politics is that one that fits just those things with instinctively we call political is impossible. So it is a term with varied uses and nuances. So politics has varied, uses and nuances. So it is very difficult to define it properly. So basically, politics is the activity by which groups reach binding collective decisions through attempting to reconcile differences among their members. As we have already read in our previous slide, that it is a collective activity among people, among a group, when they take a collective decision by, because collective decisions is important because they have to come to a particular common solution. And for that, all the people with different ideas and ideologies, they sit together, they talk, they reconcile their differences, and this is how they come to a common solution to a common problem. Now let's talk about nature of politics. Politics is a collective activity, you know that. So it is involving people who accept a common membership or at least acknowledge a shared fate. So here in politics, people have to accept that there is a common membership and they should acknowledge a shared field. So, politics presumes an initial diversity of views, if not about goals, then at least about means. So, suppose somebody wants to build a road in a particular village or particular area. So, everyone has different views to do that, the procedure through which that road will be built. So, goal is same, the to build the road, but their means must be different among people. So people a man A is having a separate idea to do that, there is a woman who has a separate concern for that. So people have different ideas, there is a diversity of ideas between people, but they have a common goal. Mostly they have a common goal, but to achieve that goal their means are different. And politics is the coming together of all the ideas, the diversified ideas, and then taking a common solution or a collective decision after discussions. So, communication is therefore central to politics. So, why communication? Because to, in a situation where you are discussing, you wanted to achieve some goal, but you are not able to, you have different ideas. All people have different ideas. So here, communication, through communication, it is very, very important to come to a particular solution. So political decisions became authoritative policy for a group, binding members to decisions that are implemented by force if necessary. So this political decision became authoritative once taken for a group, and this is binding members to decisions that are implemented by force if necessary. So the necessity of politics arises from the collective character of human life. This is a very important line. You should note it down, that what is politics? It is the necessity of the politics arises from the collective character of human life. So whenever you are taking a collective decision, politics is bound to happen. So this is what this line means. Now let's continue by saying that politics, which is an inescapable feature of human condition. So we will be also knowing who said that. So Aristotle is the person who argued that man is by nature a political animal. This is a very, very important quote by Aristotle, and many times it comes in exams also. So you please note it down, that it is Aristotle who said that man is by nature a political animal. So for him, people can only express their true nature as reasoning, virtuous beings through participation in a political community. Thus, politics consists in procedures for allowing a range of views to be expressed and then combined into an overall decision. So, what is politics? It is a procedure for allowing a range of views. There are so many diversified views to be expressed and then combined into an overall decision. All of the people can share their ideas, share their views, and then there will be a collective decision to be taken. So here Shively points out that political action may be interpreted as a way to work out rationally the best common solution to a common problem, or at least a way to work out a reasonable common solution. So this is what politics is all about. Now let's talk about Aristotle on politics. What Aristotle said. So who is Aristotle? Aristotle is a Greek, a philosopher, a scholar, and he is often, said to be the father of political science. So he has a very important role to play in politics. So for Aristotle, politics is an inescapable feature of the human condition. Man by nature is a political animal. This is what Aristotle believed. And people can only express their true nature as reasoning, virtuous through participation in a political community. So Aristotle's ideas are this, that where he said that man is by nature a political animal, he is bound to involve in politics. Now let's move forward from politics to the state. So here we should know that state is not same as the government. Why? That we'll be knowing about the elements of the states in our next slides. So do remember that whenever we are calling a state, it is not the government which is ruling in that state. State is different from government. Another is that the agreement of the individuals on the means whereby disputes are settled in forms of laws. So what is a state? It is an agreement that is signed and that is consented by individuals on the means where disputes are settled in the forms of law. So this is, suppose there is a society, people agreed, the individuals agreed upon to settle the disputes that is arising in their society to be settled by the laws that is created by the society. So state is a complex of various elements of which the government is only one. So whenever we are saying that state and governments are same, no. Government is only one element of state. State is something more to that. So that is why there is a difference between state and the government. So fascist state is controlled by a leader. This is also very important, that who is the leader of a state, whether it is a leader or a representative, which is leading the state. So in a fascist state, the state is controlled by a leader. But in a liberal democratic state, there is a characterization that there should be a representative institution such as a parliament or independent judiciary who will be running the state. So this is the difference. In one hand there is a leader, on the other hand there is a representative body, representative institution, and that is how there is this difference between two states. Now let's talk about the elements of state. As I told you, government is only one element. Here you can see that state is formed by four elements together. The first and foremost element of the state is population. Population means if there is no population, there is no state. So for state being called as a state, there should be population. Here, there is a concept of citizen and alien. So, who is a citizen? The person living in a particular territory. They have a shared history. They have a shared, traditions, cultures, and all. They are considered to be as citizens who are legal citizens of a particular state, whereas aliens are those who comes from a different state. So each state has its own territory, own boundaries, and they have some kind of commonality between them. So if in India there is some European is coming, we will be calling them alien because they are not the citizen of India. They come from a different state and they have a different culture, a different history. But here in India, people shared a common history. How there is people who they witnessed partition, they witnessed the freedom of India. So there is a difference between a citizen and an alien. Now the second element of state is territory. Without a territory, a state cannot exist. So, in a territory, it is very, very important that the territory should be fixed. If the territory is not fixed, we can't call it as a state. For example, in India, there were so many princely states that exist before independence. So all these princely states were not, the boundaries were not, fixed. When India was, again, the territory is being defined, there is always a fixed territory when we call it as a state. So this is a very important element. Next comes the government. So, government, as I told you, is an essential part, but it is only one element of a state. So, it is the government who run the state, and it has three branches: legislature, executive, and judiciary. In legislative part, decisions are, in a parliament, they come together, they have varied views, they discuss together, and they come to one solution, one particular rule. Executive's work is to implement that law or rule that is being decided in the legislature. What is the work of judiciary? Judiciary is the custodian of the constitution. Judiciary will ensure that whatever rules and regulations are being implemented by the executive is, in the same, the constitution of a particular country can, you know support that. If any unconstitutional rule, regulations, laws are being implemented by the executive, judiciary has the power to consider it as null and void. So judiciary is one who is the watchdog of what is going on in the government, and if the rules and regulations are as per the constitution or not. Next comes the sovereignty. So this sovereignty is most exclusive element of a state. And what does the sovereignty mean? Sovereignty means when all the decisions, both internal and external, of a state is taken by the people living in that state only. If any outsider is taking decisions on behalf of us, we are not sovereign at all. So, to know it more clearly, let me give you an example. When India was not independent, when Britishers were ruling India, India was not a sovereign state. Why? Because all the external and internal decisions of us was taken by the Britishers. It was not us who was taking the decision what to be done, what not to be done, but it was an outside power who is involved in taking decision in our country. That is why we were not sovereign. India became sovereign after independence because after that all the decisions are taken by Indians only. So this is a very, very exclusive element. Without sovereignty, you can't say that it is a state. So this is an exclusive element of the state. Now, let's talk about Ralph Miliband's view on state. What Ralph Miliband is saying about state is very important to understand. So, in his book, The State in Capitalist Society, Miliband mentioned different elements which together constitute the state. So, according to Ralph Miliband, there are many elements which together forms a state. And where he mentioned these elements in his book, The State in Capitalist Society. So, see what Miliband is saying. So, for Miliband, the first element of state is government. Without a government, state cannot function. Second is administrative element, that is the civil services or the bureaucracy. So civil services and bureaucracy is a part of executive who take decisions, who implement the laws. Members of the cabinet. So it is very, very important part of the state because bureaucracy is something which works at the grassroots levels, which work with the executive power. So next comes the military and the police. So it is very, very important for a state to have a particular military power, and there should be police to to secure the territory. Next comes judiciary. Judiciary is very, very crucial for a state to survive because, as I told you, judiciary's role is very, very essential. Next comes the local government. According to Ralph Miliband, there should be local government which will be, taking decisions at the local grassroots levels because they will be the person, whoever is in the local government, they will be knowing the needs and wants of the particular area locally. Next comes the last one is the representative assemblies and the parliament. So this parliament and representative assemblies are also very, very important part of state. So these are the six elements of Ralph Miliband's view on state. Now let's talk about various forms of state. There are many types of states. The modern nation state that arose after the Treaty of Westphalia was signed in 1648. So when does this state, the idea of this modern nation state started? It is after the signing of Treaty of Westphalia in the year 1648. Since Westphalia's treaty, we can say that there is an evolvement of the modern nation state. So, what are the various forms of state? The first is the liberal perspective. How liberals see a state. So, according to liberal perspective's early view, negative as it favored non-interference in individual matters. So, what liberals used to see earlier before 20th century, they believe that state should not interfere in the individual matters. That is why their view is called negative. During the 20th century, liberals changed their perspective and they said that welfare state which tries to reconcile individual liberty with social good. So it changed into a positive perspective where they said that welfare state is okay, and because they will be reconciling the individual liberty with social good. So this is how liberals changed their view from earlier times to the 20th century. So there is a shift. Next comes the Marxist perspective. How Marxist believes the state is. So Marxist rejects the idea that liberal perspective gives, and for them, for Marxist, state is an instrument of class. They believe that it is a tool in the hands of the dominant class in the society, and they want to establish a classless and stateless society. So according to Marx, there should not be any state, and they want a classless and stateless society through the proletarian revolution. Now let's come to see let's what feminists see state. So, according to liberal feminists, state can play a role in bringing equality among men and women. So, according to liberal feminists, state can play a role that to bring equality among men and women. But on the other hand, radical feminists see state as an instrument of power, and they blame state to be unequal distributor of labor. So this is two strands of feminism that see state differently. So these are the perspective through which there are various forms of state. Now let's talk about legitimation of power. So here we will be talking about Max Weber. So he describes three kinds of legitimation. First is traditional domination, where the holder of power can appeal to tradition and habit. Next is that authority has been vested personally or in their families. So when we can call that there is a traditional domination, when the people or the person in the position of authority is being vested the authority personally or in because of their family affiliation. That is why it is known as traditional domination. As we can see, the Indian kings and rulers outside, so they have authority because of their family, their reputation, and they hold this power according to the traditions. Next comes the charismatic legitimation. In charismatic legitimation, a person with exceptional personal qualities, they displayed by the leaders. So here we can take example of Mahatma Gandhi. Because of his exceptional personal qualities, he is called sometimes as a charismatic leader. Even Jawaharlal Nehru is considered to be as charismatic leader. So this is how we can see that when a people is having an exceptional personal quality, he is considered to be powerful. Next comes the legal rational legitimation. This legal rational legitimation is authorized by specific rules to command in strictly defined spheres of action. So, who is powerful? Police is powerful. Why? Because there is a specific rule that gives power to the police and not us. So, this is how this can be defined. Now, let's move on to political theory. Here, we will be talking about political theory and other interrelated terms, how they are different from each other, and also we will be learning about the approaches in political theory. What are different approaches to study political theory? That will be our focus in our upcoming slides. Now, so political theory and other interrelated terms. So starting with political philosophy. What does political philosophy means? So political philosophy provides general answers to questions such as what is justice, concept of right, etc. So when we are getting general answers to a question such as what is justice, you know what is. So political philosophy answers that. And also, political philosophy is a part of normative political theory. This is very important point. And it attempts to establish interrelationships between the concepts. So this is what political philosophy is all about. Now, let's talk about political thought. Political thought is the thought of whole community. It can be in the form of political treaties, scholarly articles, speeches, government policies, and decisions. So, when there is a thought of whole community, we can call it as a political thought. Now, let's see what is political ideology. Political ideology is a systemic and all embracing doctrine. It is a systemic and it is all embracing. It tries to give a complete and universally applicable theory of human nature, society, along with detailed program of attaining it. And what are the political ideologies? Example, we can see Marxism, communism, Nazism, liberalism, etc. So these are political ideologies, which is a systemic one, and then they are all embracing. Now, let's see from where this term political theory arises. Political theory comes from two different words polis, and theoria. And both these terms are Greek terms. As I already discussed about polis, which is a Greek term, we will be seeing that theoria, the word theory comes from, that is also a Greek word. So, what does polis mean? Polis means city states. In Greece, in ancient Greece, there were various city states, which was a very small, place, areas, which is known as city state, and each city state has its own government, own way of ruling. So, polis means city states, and theoria means explanation of anything. When you try to explain about something, it is called as theoria in Greek and theory in English. Now, what does theory mean? Theory means an emotional thinking about a subject which tries to give a solution to the problem. This is a very important part of this session because here many students found it very difficult to understand what does theory mean. So it is a mean, theory is a mean, like theory means an emotional thinking about a subject which tries to give a solution to the problem. So using a theory, we try to find out a solution to a problem, and it includes description of facts, explanation, and also the historical awareness. So whenever we apply a theory, we should know that it includes the description of facts, explanation, and historical awareness. So political theory helps us to understand concepts that shaped our politics. So through learning the political theory, it will make us understand the concept that shaped our politics. So, anything from a plan to a piece of abstract knowledge can be described as a theory. So, suppose we are planning something, there is a piece of abstract knowledge, we can call it a theory. It involves the analytical study of ideas and doctrines that have been central to the political thought. So this is about theory. What does we mean by it? And it is very very important part because we should know what we mean by theory, which is a very tough for students to understand. They often get confused among political theory, political ideology, political thought. They confused between all these terms. So this chapter helped us understand that all these things are different from each other and they have been used differently at different places. Now, let's see what are the distinctions of political theory. There are two strands. One is normative political theory and the other is empirical political theory. So, let's start with normative political theory first. So, the normative political theory is concerned with political values such as justice, liberty, equality, etc. So, ancient political philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, they talks about how to make a better government. How, like what is to be done to make a society better, to make a government better, is the concern of normative political theory when they see, when they want to, achieve an ideal form. Whereas, on the other hand, we have empirical political theory, which is concerned with political institutions and political behavior. So, normative political theory, they try to make a better how to make it, and empirical theory is what is there in present, how they are behaving currently, and not achieving something which is ideal in nature. Empirical theory is about what is currently happening and how people are behaving with each other. So, empirical political theory is concerned with political institutions and political behavior, whereas normative was about political values. And here we see that it is different. Empirical wants to know about the political institutions that is there. So in modern times, empirical political theory deals with nature and structure of the government. How structure of the governments is performing, how people are politically behaving, what are the institutions are there. So this is all things that empirical political theory is concerned about. Now let's start with the approaches in political theory. What are the different approaches? It is very, very important. Each approach is different from each other. So starting with historical approach. So Sabine is a thinker who is one of the main exponent of historical conception. So Who is the main exponent of historical approach? It is Sabine. Do note it down, it is very important. So, according to Sabine, there is a question such as what is the nature of political theory can be answered descriptively. How theory has responded to historical events and specific situation. This is also what Sabine says, and the historical consumption also contributes significantly to our normative vision. So, this historical approach is a part of normative strand. So, history of ideas may tell us that our social and political universe is a product of things whose roots lies in the past. So, whatever is happening today, we have a past, and they all the answers are lies in the past. This is what historical approach believes, and Sabine is the main exponent of this conception. Next comes the normative approach. So, normative theory is equal to philosophical theory and also known as ethical theory. Kindly underline and note it down that both the names are same. So, normative theory is equal to philosophical theory and also is equal to ethical theory. It is based on the belief that the world and its events can be interpreted in terms of logic, purpose, and ends with the help of theorist intuitions, reasoning, insights, and experiences. So, normative approaches concern are moral and purpose is to build an ideal type. So, whenever we talks about a normative approach, it is something to achieve ideal type. The aim is to achieve that. So these theorists conceived utopia in the realm of political ideas through their powerful imagination. Utopia is an ideal place where we have to, reach. So this is a considered to be an ideal powerful imagination where people want to reach. So normative theories do not realize that their urge to create absolute standard for goodness is not without pitfalls. So here normative theories believe that there is goodness, but there are also pitfalls in it, and that is what normative theorists do not realize. Now comes the empirical approach. So, this empirical approach derives theories from empirical observation, and this emerged in the 20th century. Empirical political theory refuses to accord the status of knowledge to those theories which indulge in value judgment. So, empirical approach or empirical political theory, they negates the indulgence of value judgments, and they talks about value free theory to make the field of political theory more scientific and objective. So, this empirical approach came to be known as positivism, which is based on the principle which could be empirically verified and proved. When there is no empirical verification could be done, it is not an empirical approach. And also, empirical approach is equal to positivism. This is also very important. Now, let's talk about contemporary approach. Contemporary approach emerged in the 1980s and 1990s, and it was a reaction against the established traditions. So, this contemporary approach is opposed to universalism and it critique grand narratives. So there is also post-positivism idea where it called value-free enterprises as useless and believe that political theory is an inherently normative which is supposed to offer prescription and a vision for the future. This is all about contemporary approach. Now let's move on to the concepts. And what is our first concept that we are going to learn here? It is about liberty. This is also a very, very important chapter. All the chapters in this course is very important because these are the basics that you have to know to move ahead, to know political science much more better. So now we will be talking about the political concept that is liberty, which is in unit 3. Let's talk about the meaning of liberty. So, liberty is one of the core concept and a fundamental democratic value. So, wherever there is democracy, liberty is bound to be there. Without liberty, democracy cannot function properly. Democracy cannot be guaranteed properly. So this is one of the core concept, and this is very very fundamental for a democracy to run. So this is a very important chapter that you have to know very clearly. So it is most commonly understood as absence of restraints. So whenever we talks about liberty, so we think that there should be a absence of restraint. Somebody should not stop us from doing something is our liberty. This is a common understanding. This liberties concept emerged in modern Europe with the establishment of new socio-economic and political relationships. So, from where does this liberty, idea approach? It is from the modern Europe. The notion was the idea of a rational individual who is capable of taking reasoned decisions. So, what is the core, concept of liberty is that every individual is rational and he or she should take reasoned decision which is good for them. So individual required freedom from all kinds of social, political and economic constraints. So whichever political, social or economic constraints are there in a person, we can't say that the person is free. So liberty is about freedom from all these constraints. We can say that a person is considered to be free when his or her actions or choices are not hindered by those of another. So whenever I want to do something and nobody is stopping me, I will, I will be free. I have liberty. This is what liberty is about. Now, liberty has two different, strands. One is negative liberty, and the other is a positive liberty. So we need to understand what this negative and positive means. Negative liberty is not something which is very negative, and we always there is a concern that negative word is something which stops us from doing something. But no, liberty has a negative aspect and a positive aspect, and both of them are important, and they are not against each other. So let's start with negative liberty. Let's understand what negative liberty means. Negative liberty is about an absence, absence of something. So, absence of what? Any obstacle. When you are not, you are not said, or you are not, there is an absence of obstacle in your life and in your work, you can say that you have negative liberty. So one of the best example of negative liberty is that a bird in a cage. A bird in a cage lacks negative liberty to fly. How? Let's understand. A bird can fly, but there is an absence. Absence of what? An obstacle. So there is an absence of there is obstacles also. So bird in a cage can fly, but obstacle is the cage. So that is why it lacks negative liberty to fly. Now let's come to the positive liberty. Positive liberty is about presence of something. And what is that? Capacity. So in the first example, the bird in a cage, you can see that there is an obstacle, that is cage, and if there is no cage or the absence of cage is there, a bird has negative liberty to fly. But because there is a cage, there is no absence of obstacle for a bird. That is why she lacks negative liberty to fly. Now, positive liberty is all about presence of something, the capacity. And here we take example of a penguin. A penguin is not in a cage. He or she is totally free, but it lacks, capacity to fly. That is why a penguin lacks positive liberty to fly. So if there is a presence of the capacity penguin, she can fly. But here, a penguin is not has that capacity to fly in the air. So that is why it lacks positive liberty. So this is the difference between negative and positive liberty. Again, I am explaining that a bird in a cage, if there is no obstacle in front of the bird, suppose the bird is not in a cage, then she is having negative liberty. But when a penguin is not in a cage but still can't fly because it doesn't have the capacity to fly, the penguin is not having any positive liberty. So this is the difference. To understand it more, properly, let's see what is negative versus positive liberty all about. So starting with negative liberty. Negative liberty is all about absence of restraints or absence of external constraints. So if somebody is stopping you doing something, you don't have negative liberty. So there should not be any kind of constraint to you from doing anything. Law is seen as the main obstacle to freedom. So suppose you want to do something but law is stopping you, that means you are lacking negative liberty because there is something which is stopping you. There is a constraint, there is a restraint. And if there is no constraint, you can say that you have liberty. So negative liberty believes that everyone knows his or her own interest best. What should be done, I should know it better than anyone else in my family, in my friends group, my teachers. So, negative liberty believes that it is the individual who knows his or her interest best. So, negative liberty advocates a favored minimal state because they believe that there is no, very less need of state because each individual know what they should do. They have their own knowledge of their interest is different, so they know what is best for them. So, state should not decide the individual's end and purposes. State should not come and say that you should not sleep more. State should not come and say that you should, break the traffic rules. State should be very minimal because everyone knows that if they break the traffic, there is a possibility of accident. And that is why, because the person knows his or her interest, she or he will not jump the traffic. This is what negative liberty believes. It is about also freedom of choice. To choose implies that the individual can make unhindered and voluntary selection from a range of different options. So there should be different options, and the person should have freedom of choice. He or she can choose from all the options available, and there should not be any kind of hindrances while she or he is choosing something. Now, let's talk about negative versus positive liberties, another part that is positive liberty. What is positive liberty? So, freedom as the expression of opportunities to express oneself is known as positive liberty. T.H. Green is one of the first liberal who embraced positive notion. So, who started this? Who identified this notion of positive liberty? It is the T.H. Green. Do note it down. So, according to T.H. Green, freedom is the ability of people to make the most and best of themselves. They Green believe that freedom has the ability of people to make the most of best of themselves. Now let's see the two concepts of liberty according to Isaiah Berlin. Isaiah Berlin also talked about two concepts of liberty, that is negative and positive liberty. And according to Isaiah Berlin's concept, let's see what Isaiah Berlin wants to say. So, negative liberty, according to Isaiah Berlin, is when a person should be left alone. Individual should be left alone with his or her decisions. Nobody should, interfere in that. Why? Because an individual, according to Isaiah Berlin, knows his or her interest best. I know what is good for myself, so I should not be hindered and I should not be, pressurized to do something. This is called negative liberty. Here, Berlin said that individuals should be left alone from whom? he or she should be left alone from any public activities, private activities, and life goals. So here, Berlin said that there should not be any person who can act like an obstacle. So if I want to go for a picnic, my parents, my teachers should not act as an obstacle. This is what negative liberty is that Berlin is talking about. So here, when he talks about person, it can be any government, any social norms, or any kind of tradition which can act as an obstacle in my own interest. So, in this negative liberty, what is the role of the state? What role should state, play? So, state can't decide for you and intervene. This is what negative liberty believes, that state can't decide on your behalf, and it should provide a legal framework where we can pursue our goals. So states only work is to provide legal framework where we can achieve what we want. Also, negative liberty is not about freedom to starve. If there is no state, there are many poor people who will be starving because they will not be getting any help from the state as a welfare, measures. So this negative liberty is not like that. That is, say that people have freedom to starve. No, state intervention is not completely prohibited in negative liberty, but a very minimum role it can play. Positive liberty. Positive liberty is about individual who is freedom to do what one should do. So, positive liberty says that an individual is free to do whatever he or she wants, whatever he or she want to achieve, but not to, steal someone. Why? Because that individual should not steal. Okay. So also positive liberty said that a individual has freedom to become what one should become. So an individual is saying that I want to become a burglar, or I want to become a uh, thief. That is not applicable and that is not acceptable according to positive liberty, because he or she should not become a thief. So you can become what you should become. Okay, this is what positive liberty is saying. Whereas on the other hand, negative liberty say that there should not be any kind of constraint what a person is doing, because person knows what is best for him or her. Okay, this is the difference between positive and negative liberty. So in positive liberty, there is a theory of self, and which is very important to understand, because this is the concept that is given by Isaiah Berlin. So positive liberty talks about theory of self, which is divided into two parts. First is the higher self, the other is the lower self. So what is this higher self? Higher self is controlled by reason. Reason means when you think rationally, when you apply your logic in doing something, you are reasonable. So in higher self, a person is controlled by his or her reason, and freedom is called self mastery. When you use your freedom and you reason behind, there is a reason behind doing something, you are guided by your higher self. On the other hand, when we talk about lower self, we are controlled by our desire and irrational. We are not using our rationality, we are not using logic, and we are guided by our desire. So when we take the example of a thief, a thief, according to Isaiah Berlin's positive liberty, a thief is guided by his or her lower self. Why? Because the thief is controlled by his desire to achieve more, desire to achieve something which is he should not do. So he is guided by his lower self. Okay. Also, when we take the example of smoking, a person who is smoking, is guided by lower self. Why? Because it is desire, and he is acting irrationally, because if he uses his rationale, he knows that smoking is injurious to health, but he can't control his desire to smoke. That is why he is guided by his lower self, he or she. If he is or she is guided by his higher self, she will be knowing that smoking is not good for health, and that is the reason that will she will apply on that, and then she can master herself. So this is the theory of self according to Isaiah Berlin in Positive Liberty. Next comes the role of state in positive liberty. So, in positive liberty, according to Isaiah Berlin, a roles of state is very welcoming. State intervention is very much welcomed in positive liberty's idea. Why? Because when you are not controlled by your higher self, state should intervene. So, a person when he or she is smoking, the person is smoking, he or she is not guided by his higher self, because they are not using their reason, rationale and logic, and they, even knowing that smoking is injurious, they are still smoking because they are guided by their desire. So when people are doing these kinds of things, state intervention is welcomed in positive liberty's role of state. Why? Because intervention increases liberty. How? If state stops someone smoking or stop someone drinking, and there is a there is hindrances in smoking and drinking, it increases the liberty of the person, because otherwise, because of heavy drinking and heavy smoking, it can be very very difficult for him to survive for more years. And that is why stopping someone doing something is increasing his or her liberty to do more things. When a person and when a population is not guided by their higher self, positive liberties of Isaiah Berlin says that state intervention is welcome. State can play its role, and state can take action against them. So, this is all about our today's session, where we have read about 3 units that are so much important to understand political theory. So, initially, we started with politics. What is politics? How it evolved? It evolved from the word polis, that was a Greek word. Aristotle gave its own, definition of polis and politics. So, we understand what politics mean. There is definition by Shively, where there is saying that when you come together, you take a collective decision and find out a common solution from a common problem through discussion and persuasion is called politics. So this is what we have learned in our first part, where we also saw that how politics is a very very important thing, and how there is different strands also. So in second part, we have learned about approaches and the interrelated terms that we often mix with each other. So this is a very common problem, very common issue that comes with the students of political science, that they don't understand what is political thought, how it is different from political philosophy, how it is different from political theory. So this second chapter which we have covered today was a very very important chapter, because that gives us a definition, that gives and it helps us understand how one is different from the other. The concepts are different, and we often use these as interchangeable. So this is very important chapter that we have done today. Second part of the chapter was about the approaches. What are the approaches of political theory? There are few different strands to understand the political theory. We learned about normative theory, which talks about what should be done, what ought to be, and how to achieve a imaginary place which is very ideal. Empirical talks about what is happening in the current scenario, how institutions are behaving, what is the political behavior of the people living in that part. So it is about what is there, and it talks about observation, facts and all. In the next part, we have learned about liberty, where we see that what is liberty. The idea came from Western Europe, and this liberty has, positive and negative two aspects. And also we have learned that how Isaiah Berlin tried to define both positive and negative liberty, where we have also learned what is the difference, what is the theory of self, how positive and negative liberty talks about the role of the state, and etc. So, in the next class, we will be talking about equality and justice. With this, I end today's lecture. Thank you.